If you brought a Bible, go ahead and turn to Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. If you're not aware, this is week 3 of a series we've called SteadFAST. This is the series finale. We've been learning about prayer and fasting. Both of them are important God-given tools that help us trade something good for what's better. That's really what fasting is all about. You're giving up, you're sacrificing something good for something that's better. I wanted to help you visualize this a little bit today. So this is us connected to something that's good, okay? Now good can represent a lot of different things. And I want to highlight that when we fast, there's a false belief out there that fasting in Isaiah 58 is about fasting from sin and evil. I just want to be clear, fasting from sin and evil is not a thing. Salvation is about ridding our lives of those things. You don't just temporarily disconnect from those, okay? So when we fast, we give up something that is a good thing. Something that, though, maybe we became a little too reliant on. It could be Netflix. It could be your social media. It could be some food, a few meals. It could be caffeine. It could be sugar. It could be a lot of different things that they're not bad in and of themselves. In fact, some of those are really good, but we're so connected to them that oftentimes we rely completely on them. So fasting is a tool that God has given us. And I want you to understand the way that this tool works. Fasting, I want you to visualize this. Fasting and prayer are two different sides of the same tool. Okay? Watch this. Fasting is the claw on the hammer. Fasting is the thing that disconnects us from whatever it was that we were connected to. So fasting unfastens us from some great things. Whatever it was that you've chose to give up or to sacrifice. We're 4 days into a 10-day fast. Some of you are antsy to check your Instagram because you haven't for a few days, or a meal or whatever it might be. You can't wait to drink another cup of coffee sometime soon. So you're disconnected. Fasting is the claw on the hammer that disconnects us from that. But I want to highlight that if we stop here and we only use this part of the tool, then we've missed the most powerful part of it. Because fasting is not primarily about disconnecting. Fasting is about disconnecting so that we can be fastened to something better, okay? So we go from good, and then we want to be connected to God. That's the point. So what's beautiful about fasting is that as we fast, and we're disconnected from something that, again, it's not a bad thing, but prayer is the other side of the tool, and it connects us to God himself right there so that we are now connected to the Lord. So fasting and prayer are both sides of the same tool. And if you only fast, let's just call it a diet or self-deprivation, okay? If you only disconnect yourself, then you haven't done the whole heart of fasting. This is fasting right here, us connected to God. So watch this. I hope maybe even to breathe some grace into our tendency for legalism. Some of you, as you've been praying about what you were going to go into with a fast, you had a whole plan. And maybe you're on day 4 and it already hasn't worked out. Or maybe you're going to get some time throughout this week and your plan just didn't work out. You got back on your Instagram or you went back to eating or you drank a cup of coffee. And listen, let me just give us a principle, an overlying principle for the fast. If by the end of the fast, 10 days, we break our fast together with communion next Sunday. If by the end of the fast, we say, I feel more connected with God than ever before. I've talked to God more. I've been reminded to pray more. Then we've succeeded regardless of what your fast looked like. You're like, I was going for 5 days and I only made it 3. But did you pray more? Right? That's the question I've been asking people as I've reached out to people. Hey, how are you doing with the fast? Hey, how are you doing with this? And the question I try to always ask them is, okay, that's good. Thanks for the update. But are you praying more? Because that's the point. And the beautiful thing about fasting is it's an ongoing reminder. You can't not think about praying. And man, I've just been so challenged by the realization this week that sometimes I just get going in my life and I forget that God is there. And so the beautiful tool of fasting is that it disconnects us from these things that are good, and it reminds us to get connected with the Lord. Prayer is the necessary second half of the tool, the weapon. We don't want to just deprive ourselves. We want to connect ourselves to the Lord. So that's what I want to spend our time talking together about today, just for these next few moments. And then we're gonna close our services today with prayer. We're going to actually together corporately pray. So today I want to share a message with you that I'm calling life-altering prayer from Colossians chapter 4, verse 2. Life-altering prayer. Paul tells the Colossian church in Colossians 4, verse 2, to continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. That's the whole thing that we want to talk about today. Life-altering prayer. Because oftentimes I think, and I've called the message this because I think often when we approach prayer, we tend to pray because we sense a need for change somewhere. But I want us to understand today that before God changes anybody else or anything else, we need to start by asking God to change us. That's what I'm talking about, life-altering prayer. Whose life needs to be altering? Let's start with us. We need to start with some alteration of ourselves before we get anywhere else. And so that's what this message is designed to do. I want to give you kind of a recipe for life-altering prayer. And it's probably kind of cruel for me to say the word recipe while we're in a fast, okay? But that's kind of how I'm viewing this. 3 ingredients, if you will. Don't let your stomach growl too loud. 3 ingredients for life-altering prayer that will change you, that will move God, and will change others around you, okay? I want to give you 3 things. Number 1, life-altering prayer is faithful. And what I mean by that is it's ongoing, it's consistent. First couple words in Colossians 4:2, continue steadfastly in prayer. This means ongoing prayer. Continue steadfastly means persistent. It means diligent. It means keep on with devotion. Sometimes I think we lack the reality of the power of prayer in our lives. Sometimes we miss out on what God wants to do because we've just kind of honestly bypassed how important it is in our lives. And when Paul talks about praying steadfastly, we have to understand that continuing steadfastly in prayer is as important to our soul as continuing steadfastly in breathing is to our body. It's that important. In fact, this command here, continue steadfastly, reminds me of Paul's command in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, where he says, pray without ceasing. How do you pray without ceasing? Well, first of all, it comes from the realization that God is with you. His presence is with you at all times. And second of all, it's just the development of a language that you're just talking to God ongoing. The idea is we want to develop our lives in a way so that prayer is not something that I schedule out as much as it's something that I'm just doing, right? Because I just know God's with me. When I'm in the car, when I'm at school, when I'm with my kids, when I'm alone, God's with me. It doesn't have to be only in that chair that you sit in early in the morning with a cup of coffee. He's there too, but he's also with you at all other times. So since he's with you, we should be talking to him, right? That's prayer without ceasing. That's continue steadfastly in prayer with devotion, ongoing, persistent. We want to get to a place where we're not just having to schedule out our prayer. You don't have to schedule your breathing, right? I mean, there are times where you have to remind yourself to breathe when you're extra angry or panicked. Breathe, breathe. And then there are times spiritually where you have to remind yourself to pray. I'm gonna pray right now before something comes out of my mouth that I wish had not come out of my mouth. I know I'm not the only one who has been there. We got to remind ourselves sometimes to breathe, sometimes to pray, but we want to get in a relationship, kind of a rhythm with God where prayer is just something that we're doing I don't have to constantly grab for my phone. I don't have to constantly walk to the fridge. I'm reminded as I disconnect from these things that I need to be more connected with God. That's the heart of fasting and prayer. Continue steadfastly with prayer. A day without prayer is basically telling God that you've got it covered. A situation, an argument, a season of life without prayer is you, whether you use these words or not, it's you telling God you don't need him to intervene and you've got it. You can take care of it. I'll worry about this one, God. That's what a day without prayer demonstrates to God. And so prayer is just something that we want to continually cultivate. I've heard it talked about praying ASAP prayers as soon as possible versus as long as it takes prayers. We live in the ASAP culture. Can you ship it to me overnight? Can I get that pizza delivered a little bit quicker? Why is this drive-through line taking so long? Right? We live in the age of I need it right now. And we can easily drag that into our prayer life. God, I want this answered now, then, right? Like you're already behind because I just asked for it and why haven't you provided it? And we'll pray for a minute, we'll pray for a day about it, but then if God doesn't answer it like we want, we can easily just be tempted to move on. Are you willing? What if it took a decade? What if your wandering kid that has wandered away from the Lord and it gets way worse before it gets better? Are you willing to pray for a decade? Are you willing to pray for 20 years? Are you willing to pray until something happens? That's the idea. That's as long as it takes prayer. That's continue steadfastly in prayer. Like no matter what it takes. God, it's gotten worse since I started praying for it. My diagnosis, my financial situation, my marriage. But are you willing? Are you willing to keep praying? Paul says continue steadfastly in prayer. With devotion, persistent, requires sacrifice and strategy because it's not going to happen on its own. It's something we work toward. So life-altering prayer is faithful. Number 2, life-altering prayer is watchful. Look at this in verse 2. He says, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in thanksgiving. Life-altering prayer is watchful. Being watchful means alert, vigilant. I think it can describe us in 2 different ways. That our prayers not only should be watchful physically, but also spiritually. We've all been there when we're praying. If you pray regularly, I imagine you've been there where you're trying to pray and you just fall asleep. Okay? I won't make you raise your hand, but I will tell you this. If that's the case for you, you're in good company because all the disciples did the same thing with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. All right? So, all right, can we feel a little bit better about ourselves? They were there with Jesus on the night that he was going to get taken and beaten, and they fell asleep. Those guys were snoozing over there under the olive tree. And Jesus had to come wake them up multiple times. Come on. How embarrassing is it? Have you ever been praying with someone and fallen asleep? I did this with my wife once. Sitting on the back porch praying. She's like, Kevin, are you still awake? I'm like, I'm just worshiping in a different way right now. God said to rest, so that's what I'm doing. Right? Sometimes it's physical fatigue that needs to be overcome, so our prayers can be watchful. Jesus said in Mark 14, verse 38, he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Right? Like sometimes we just got to fight the physical fatigue. But let's be honest that sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it is physical fatigue. Other times, though, it's spiritual sleepiness. Meaning the spirit is weak when the flesh is willing. And here's what that could look like. We've got the space. We've got the time. I might even know right now what I probably should be doing is praying. I don't feel like it. Sometimes our spirit is weak. We're just distant. We're just disconnected. That's the beautiful thing about prayer and fasting. It connects us to God. Paul says, pray, continue in prayer and be watchful in it. We're to be steadfast in it, but to be watchful as well. That's such an important word that he uses right here. I want you to understand that watchful prayer honors God. It honors God because watchful prayer is an active prayer. It's expecting God to respond, not because he owes it to you, not because you had the right combination of words, not because he should be impressed with the way that you're living. Watchful prayer honors God because you're expecting him to move, because you're appealing to his good nature and his power. You're leaning into who God is and what you know through the scriptures that he wants to do in our lives. And as you're praying these prayers that honor God, these watchful, consistent, steadfast prayers, these honor God. You know, a lot of times I think we get so busy praying about the work that we need to do and the work that we want God to do that we forget that prayer is the work. Now, that doesn't mean we just sit down and pray all for the rest of our lives. Obviously, there's work that needs to get done, but prayer will multiply your efforts. Prayer will multiply your energy. Prayer will invite God into whatever it is that you're working so hard on. And so often we're just waiting for God to do the work. No, prayer is the work. Come on, we gotta lean into the power that God has given us. So when Paul talks about watchful prayer, that's exactly what he's referring to. Watchful prayer is not lazy. It's not like feet kicked up prayer, okay? This is not just like cross my fingers, I hope it works out kind of prayer. Prayer, I believe in the Spirit watchful prayer in the Spirit has a posture that kind of goes with it, okay? Nate, if you don't mind, could I borrow your chair real quick? You could just sit right there if you'd like. I just need this chair real quick. I'll bring it right back, okay, Nate? Sorry for that. Okay, so listen, I think prayer, that's nice. You guys get to cuddle on the front row. That's perfect. Okay, so I think here's what prayer often looks like to us. We want to say that we're steadfast and watchful in our prayers, but oftentimes I think we've just got this spiritual posture of just like kicked back, and we'll just like see if God does anything. Maybe even my feet kicked up, right? And I just like, I'll get to it. God will probably do it at some point, maybe. It's lazy prayer. It's like fingers crossed prayer. Hopefully he does it. I believe that no matter what your physical posture is in prayer, our spiritual posture should be this leaned in, expectant posture. Like, I just know God's going to do something. Listen, can I just speak a word to somebody in here, many of us in here, who are praying for the salvation of a lost one, a loved one, a friend, a family member? Can I just tell you, it is directly within the will of God that person would surrender to Christ. Come on, lean into those prayers. Lean in. When you think you want them saved, oh, Jesus shed his blood for them. He wants them saved. So come on, lean in. You may physically be kicked back with a cup of coffee, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. But spiritually, come on, lean into it. You know what I find too is that sometimes it helps my spirit get in the right posture when my body's in the right posture. Sometimes I can just, like when I kick my feet up and I'm drinking a cup of coffee, it's just kind of a cozy way to pray. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I can just kind of settle into it and lose the lean-in power of prayer. Watchful prayer, I believe, is so expectant. You're leaning into God's good nature and his power and his desire to hear and to answer. Amen? That's the prayer that we want to be a part of. So life-altering prayer is faithful, first of all, but it's also watchful. Here's the third thing. Write it down. Life-altering prayer is grateful. Here's your chair back. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it. It's grateful. Did you write that down? Life-altering prayer is grateful. And here's why. Paul says, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. Why is that so important? Well, because a grace-filled life is a grateful life. Did you hear me? If you have experienced God's grace, then gratitude is just something that we have. When we begin to comprehend some of the amazing things that God has done in us and through us and for us and all around us, how could we not be grateful? Now, I'm not saying life is just smiles and rainbows and Skittles, okay? There's pain. Pain is real. We don't downplay pain here. I love the honesty that we can have with one another. I talked to somebody after the last service. I said, hey, how are you today? She was like, you know what? I'm having kind of an off day. And I just said, I'm so glad that you knew you could say that. This is a place to be real, right? So I'm not here to downplay pain. I'm just here to kind of like lift up grace. Because in the middle of whatever you're dealing with, you have a reason to be thankful. And somebody here, I imagine, is like, I don't know about that because you don't know my circumstance. You don't know how bad we've got it. You don't know about our details. And I would just say, first of all, you're right. I don't know all your details. Second of all, I would just refer you to the Apostle Paul, who is writing the letter of Colossians and saying to stay steadfast in prayer and continue in it with thanksgiving. He's writing this letter from a Roman prison cell. I would refer you to the book of Philippians, which the theme is joy, also written from the bottom of a Roman prison cell. I'm thinking if Paul could be grateful there, we can be grateful wherever we are. I'm thinking if Paul, chained to Roman guards, could pen a letter about joy that can't be chained, that the devil can't touch, that Jesus gave him. I'm thinking in the middle of your divorce, in the middle of your finances, with your kid running away, with your job, you don't know what's up. I imagine somewhere you can say, God, you've just given me grace and I'm alive for another day and I'm going to be grateful today. Today's going to be different. I'm going to choose gratitude. I'm telling you, life-altering prayer is filled with gratitude. It'll change you. It'll change you. It'll change people around you. And that's the goal here. Because Thanksgiving isn't just like a day on the calendar. It's how we're called to live. Thanksgiving isn't a meal. It's a mindset. It's a shift in how we think. I don't know about you, but as we've gone into this fast, we're doing 10 days, we're 4 days in. I made just kind of a list. I think I have 5 or 6 things that I'm praying for consistently each day, in addition to what we're praying for as a church. And one of those things I've been praying for is envy and entitlement, that God would just kill them in my life. I know I'm not the only one who struggles with envy and entitlement. I imagine that we felt the pain of envy much less before social media. And then social media just opened wide this door where now I can compare my life to anybody else around the world. Look how good they've got it. Their family seems perfect. Look at all these vacations they get to go on. Look at that pastor. Look what's happening in that church. I can so easily, just by scrolling, begin to compare my life to theirs. And here's why I tell you this. Because if we're going to live lives of gratitude, if we're going to pray prayers filled with gratitude, we have to defeat envy and entitlement. Envy and entitlement, in my opinion, are 2 of the most dangerous enemies of gratitude. So I've been praying about this last week. And I feel like the Lord gave me just kind of a breakthrough thought as I prayed about it on the very first day. I was just praying, God, would you give me some tools to battle envy and some entitlement? Here's what he spoke to me. He's saying, Kevin, it's not so much that envy and entitlement kill gratitude. It's that envy and entitlement are the weeds that grow in the absence of gratitude. See what I'm talking about? So when I'm not doing my job cultivating gratitude, reminding myself every day, because life will fill you with reasons not to be grateful. So when I'm not cultivating, actively growing gratitude in my life, and that starts to go away, the natural thing to spring up, envy and entitlement. It's the weeds of envy and entitlement. So what do you do with those weeds? You spray gratitude all over them, right? Just like slosh it all over them. just like, no, I'm going to be grateful God's using that guy. I'm going to be grateful that they get to go on vacations on their social media. I'm going to be grateful for what I have. I'm going to be grateful that God's provided for others. I'm just going to say, God, my life is filled with grace, and I'm thankful for that. And so if you don't answer another prayer, God, you've done enough. That's what I'm going to say. God, you are so good. And when I recognize God's grace, I'm filled with gratitude. So life-altering prayer is filled with gratitude. And I'm telling you that because when you're able to cultivate gratitude, it'll change you. It'll change your prayers. And those prayers will begin to change the people and the circumstances all around you. God loves to hear prayers of gratitude. They speak to his heart. When we envy, when we feel entitled, like God owes us something, we're telling God that what he gave us isn't enough. Let's take some time and be grateful, right?